sit. We kind of moved it where we have you in front. We'd like to have you front and center so you can look right at it. If we can please have a roll call.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Markham.
Here.
Grant.
Here.
Sala. Parker.
Here.
Jerry. Here. Harris. Forum.
Please. Senator Breslin, if you could start us with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I can have approval of the minutes for meeting for audit date.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. I am going to move right on to our guest. Representative McDermott, if you can please introduce yourself.
Do I use the mic?
Oh, push, yeah, just push.
And
that.
push the-
I don't have visual today, so.
Okay. I'm State Representative Margot McDermott. I represent the 37th District, 76% of which is here in Will County, Frankfort, Mokina, New Lenox, Homer Glen, a little bit of Joliet, also Orland and Tinley in Cook.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm State Senator Sue Resin. I represent the 38th District. It's a little bit larger. It's Will County, Grundy, LaSalle, Bureau, Putnam, and Kendall County. So if you start in the Wilmington area and go all the way west on Interstate 80 to almost Princeton, that is the district I represent. I represent an agricultural district and also the energy corridor of the country. We have a lot of energy producing companies in that area and the chemical corridor as well.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, I'm Pat McGuire, State Senator for the 43rd District. The short description of the 43rd District is the intermodals to IKEA.
Well, but thank you, Senator.
Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, my name is John Connor. I represent the 85th District. I was appointed in June to replace Emily McCasey. My district runs between Farrell Road in Lockport and Weber Road in Romeoville, and basically straight north up along between the canal and Route 53 all the way up to Woodridge. Thank you.
And Jeff, did they tell you that we pretty much had Emily run half of our bills, so you're going to be busy. Will County's going to keep you very busy.
I was told that, yes, that I would be busy in the upcoming
Yeah,
session.
your district has been very much of a hot spot, to say the least.
Thank you.
A lot going on. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule. And, we're not, this is nothing of that where we're going to just put you onto these pedestals and say, what happened? How did we get to there? But if you could kind of just, in a few words, nothing of that of lengthy, because I know you're thinking, what is she going to ask me? And just kind of giving a recap of what went on. We are going to discuss to the budget of the state and how it did in fact impact us in the county. And we actually have our finance chair. Matter of fact, Mike, you can come up or you can talk from there, whatever is easy. Just kind of hear, as this is all going on, and I know it was very hard decisions and there was a lot of pressure and there's no easy answers. No one goes without saying. It was all out there. But we thought this would be a chance to kind of hear of how the budget down in the state in Springfield has impacted us into the county. Margaret, did you want to say anything on any of your thoughts of what went on with this spot? Come on, we've done this.
In a way, I'm not necessarily sure I want to be the first speaker.
Okay.
I'm going to speak to you about the process as I see it. I've been a member of the Illinois House for 3 years. I had nothing to do with this budget whatsoever, and I voted no on it in every way, shape, and form. I think what people need to understand about the budget process, at least when you're in the minority in the Illinois House, is that it doesn't have anything to do with us. Wherever it's done, however it's done, It's not done with input from us. So I really can't speak to how this budget, you want to hear about how it was put together, I have no frickin' clue. And when I was elected, I thought I would participate in working on big issues and the issues that are really essential for the future and welfare of our state. That's not something that is done in the Illinois House by the rank and file people. So while I'm willing and able to work, I'm not allowed. I'm not permitted, I'm not invited. So, and I'm certainly gonna vote no. I think there's nothing about this budget that I think is correct for our future in terms of it doesn't deal with what we should have dealt with. There wasn't a lot of attempt to grapple with any of the difficult issues that are going to change our trajectory. 2-3 years, we're going to be right back where we are without enough money to go forward because we haven't changed any of the underlying drivers of our dollars out the door. So, as far as getting into the details of what's in the budget, who the hell knows? I mean, I had, hours to read this thing. So, when I voted no, it wasn't because I, poured over the stack this high. Remember Mike Bost, remember him throwing the pages up in the air? Nothing's changed, people. So, I'm not here to defend it, and I can't explain the process to you.
But in the same token, I will have to say, Senator, right, if we didn't have this budget that was passed, it was definitely nothing that anyone had gone and painted that it was going to be the perfect budget. We, in the municipality level, township, county, there's a lot of services that would not be rendered and would happen. What is your...
Yeah, I appreciate that. First of all, I'd like to make clear that I think an accurate description of this budget, warts and all, is that it's the Cullerton-Redonio budget. Former Republican Senate leader Christine Redonio called Senate President John Cullerton over the last Christmas break and said, we got to find a way out of this. And so they worked together, developed a package of bills, which came to be known as the Grand Bargain. And we passed, three of those constitute the budget. So there's the revenue bill, there's the budget, and then there's the BIMP, the budget implementation bill. The way I explain that is the budget's like buying a car, the BIMP is putting gas in it. So those three bills, the revenue bill, the budget bill, and the BIMP, the budget implementation bill, they constitute the FY18 budget. And yeah, I appreciate your point that during those 736 days that we shamefully went without a budget, 90% of the state budget was on autopilot due to above-the-line appropriations, continuing appropriations, due to consent decrees, due to court orders. The 10% of the budget, of course, that wasn't funded was human services and higher ed. So one reason I voted for this bill, after working to find almost $3 billion in cuts and reduce spending from the previous year's state budget, one reason I voted for this bill with the tax increase and with the measures that affect local governments, county governments, is that this now funds human services. Cornerstone, Trinity, Stepping Stones, and you're all attentive legislators. I'm sure you've met with leaders of those organizations and seen the fear on their faces, heard the fear in their voices that one of their clients might die due to short staffing. And what that's about is people that take care of the developmentally disabled are called DSPs, direct service providers, and their starting wage is $9.35 an hour statewide. And here in Will County, we now have a tight labor market due to Amazon and other new employers. So these human service agencies are losing their DSPs in droves because rather than making $9.35 an hour, working in a group home, taking care of people who can't care for themselves, they can start at Amazon at $13, $14, $15. So one thing we achieved in this budget is far from ideal, but those DSPs will now get a 75% raise statewide. Also, higher education, the other part of the budget that was stuck. Joe Junior College didn't have operating funds. Governor State didn't. And there were no MAP grants. MAP, of course, Monetary Work Program, is the state's need-based financial aid program. There were no MAP grants given out in the last fiscal year, nor in this year, but we backfilled that for FY17, so all those approximately 100,000 students statewide were waiting for financial assistance from the state of Illinois got it. And this pertains to both public and private institutions, because Lewis and University of St. Francis have hundreds, perhaps thousands of students who are waiting for the MAP grants. Both those schools fronted millions of dollars to those students, which exacerbated the cash crunch of those institutions. So also this budget reauthorizes the release of $10 million to Joliet Junior College for its city center campus. So again, I believe that this budget is good for residents of Will County, especially when it comes to human services and higher education.
I know that's very important. We talked about that before. Senator Risen?
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. So it's always good to hear our thought process. Obviously, we have differing viewpoints, everyone here. But let me remind you where we first started before we went down the road of having a new governor and actually having a two-party system sitting at the table. For the past 10 years, we've had a budget that has not been balanced. They said it's balanced, however, the liabilities were pushed off to the next year. Then we would start next year's budget, $2 billion in the hole, and that continued for many, many years, and as a result, we are where we are. A governor came in who said that I will support a budget, but it needs to be balanced. And also, what hasn't been talked about here at the table today, something that we think needs to be done, we need reforms that decrease the cost of doing business in the state. We need reforms that decrease the cost of living in the state. I know for taxing bodies, for local municipalities, for school districts, the talk of that gives you heartburn, I understand that, but we speak to constituents directly who are saying, do what you need to do, but we're being taxed out of our home. And we can move right across the border and pay a third of the property tax. So, as Senator McGuire said, Leader Radonio and Senator Cullerton went down the pathway of trying to find a bipartisan compromise, not only that deals with the budget, but also deals with reforms. And I know that we talked about the budget here, and this is the budget that they agreed upon, but the bills were put together in a manner that they were linked, that the reforms that we negotiated would be on the table, such as reforms that made sense to bring down the cost of workers' comp. Workers' comp in the state, they could pay up to, I would say, or if you have the same company across the border in Indiana and you compare their worker comp cost, that same company in Indiana would pay a third of the cost. That's the reality of it. So how do we put forth sensible reform that protects the hurt worker, as well as brings down, recognizes that our costs are very high compared to other states, brings down that cost. So businesses say, when I have the opportunity to invest and expand my company, because that's the biggest way to grow jobs. Take a company that already exists and simply invest and grow in that area. Where am I going to put that money? Am I going to put it in the state of Illinois, or will I put it, invest in a different state? And they're making those decisions each and every day when they're deciding to invest. And they're looking at cost, and workers' comp is a cost that they look at as well. They also look at a state that for many years has not been able to balance a budget. And they know that the impact of that will be borne by the job creators in this state. So we need to recognize some reforms that give the people, the private sector, the businesses, more flexibility and have them invest in this state as opposed to other states, and also address the issue of property taxes and at least slow the growth. We hear consistently from our constituents, and I represent 3 of the 8 counties I represent, have nationally ranked median property taxes, okay? Now, and we can get into that because 70% of that pays education. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But to the person who's paying the property tax, this is a very big issue. When your property tax, I have people paying more in property taxes in some places in my district than they pay in their mortgage. So it's an issue we need to look at. I know some of you looked at me with surprise. I can tell you in Kendall County, I can tell you exactly where that is. So these are very real numbers. And so when we put together the grand bargain, reforms that recognize that lower the cost of living here and lower the cost of doing business here were important, as well as the budget that was passed, you know, before we look at new revenue. Also with that budget, there was a new income tax increase passed, as you well know. This is an income tax increase that takes an additional week out of middle-class families to pay for government that continues to expand. So those are the challenges when we're discussing in Springfield. By far, I've been there for 7 years, I'm going on 8 years, by far the most difficult year that we've had in trying to negotiate and deal and move good policy forward, because we hear from everyone as well. So, you know, this budget isn't something that I support, although we were ready to take hard votes on certain issues that we typically don't. If we could have had the grand bargain, which had 11 pieces of legislation all tied together. I do commend President Cullerton and Leader Radonio. That was a bipartisan group that set to answer a question and solve this problem, so I commend them for doing that as well.
Thank you. Now, Representative Connor, I feel definitely you inherited all of this. So I'm not going to put you so much onto the spot, and I don't want to feel like anyone is on the spot, but I know, like I said, you know, your feeling of coming in, and it's only been a couple months, correct? So
That is correct. I was appointed on June 24th, so yeah, I haven't been in very long. And I went down the Monday after the Saturday in which I was sworn in and began, you know, taking part. So it was, I can give you the outsider's perspective, having not been either a politician or a member of the legislature before the budget special session. And in going down, obviously I did not vote for the tax increase. I did not feel that would be a responsible decision as a brand new member. And I was not part of the negotiations that the senator referred to. So it was a very interesting process for me to go down. And to me, the highlight of what I considered the floor arguments that were going on at the time. Dave Harris, who was a Republican representative across the aisle for me, was talking about how the $800 million we were paying in debt service because we did not have a budget going forward. He said, you might as well take that money, pile it up, and light it on fire, because it's doing absolutely no good for the citizens of the state of Illinois. It's simply maintaining the debt that was incurred during the period that we did not have a budget going forward. So although I did not vote for the tax increase, I did vote for the budget. And I felt as though this was historic. You have to move forward with a budget, and there are hard decisions to be made. But the cost that we're asking our citizens and our constituents to pay by doing nothing, by not making the hard decisions, was $800 million that is essentially burning in a pile on the floor of the Illinois legislature. So again, there are many difficult decisions that remain to be made. We have a lot of work that needs to be done. But I commend the leadership in the Senate for coming together to get the grand bargain going, because these are difficult. But the price of inaction is we're paying a bunch of money for absolutely no return on investment. So it was a very eye-opening experience for me to go see how the sausage is made. So thank you.
I'm going to kind of segue right into, so everything as you're forming with this budget, and we have all felt the impact of the income tax increase, of course. Now it kind of goes on to a different level. Mike Frislone, who is our chair of finance, is kind of give you an idea, and for all of us to get an idea of how this has impacted us on our budget for the county.
Yes, I'm not going to try to be political. I'm just telling you the facts. And I'm not sure that the whole legislature in Springfield is even aware of the facts. So in our case, with the loss of some RTA tax, with a surcharge and a collection of sales tax, with the loss of some LD funds, and with the loss of some replacement tax funds, we're going to lose $2.4 million. And this is going to happen across the state at every municipality and every county. I didn't see anything in the paper. I didn't see any legislator stand up and say, part of the way we're balancing this budget is we're going to take money away from the counties and the cities and then let them tax you at a higher rate. Because at this point, there's no way that we can take these funds. We've been responsible here in Will County, you guys all know that. Guys and gals, you all know that we've been responsible and balanced our budget and kept us, our finances as frugal as we can. There's nowhere to get additional $2.4 million, especially in the face of the fact that you have unfunded mandates like the 911 consolidation and other unfunded mandates. And then on top of that, we all suffer that the healthcare cost increase. Ours is $2.3 million. So with our $2.3 million alone and this 2.4 loss, we start up the year minus $4.7 million. So if any of you can tell me when the negotiations were happening, how was the decision made to hurt counties and cities like Joliet and take money that they need to run their operations?
Also, John, do you know off the top of your head from Joliet how much?
I do. And I want to say that I talked to Mayor Odekirk this morning. He had a family matter he had to attend to, otherwise he would have been here. But just to kind of go over our numbers the way Chairman Frizzalone did, the city is going to lose about $1.5 million as it relates to the local government distributive fund. I think it was about $600,000 as a result of the 2% administrative fee, and then another $500,000 with respect to the replacement taxes. So we're looking at about $2.6 million is what our accounting folks down at the city are telling us. So.
And the Forest Reserve, are we?
Forest Reserve, I think Chairman Frizzalone can probably speak, or Chairman Tuminello can speak to that. He rolled out the budget last week. So the Forest Reserve is also taking a substantial, it's all relative with respect to your budget, but taking a substantial reduction in their replacement taxes as well. Ray, if you want to expand on that.
Yes, thank you. Again, the budget was a result of compromise. There were things in this budget Democrats liked and Democrats disliked. There were things in the budget Republicans liked and Republicans disliked. Regarding LGDF, there was a proposal to cut LGDF 10% permanently. We resisted that. This budget and the tax increase enabled us to devote an additional $350 million into general state aid for schools. So after we adopted the budget, of course, we adopted a landmark school funding reform bill, which changes the way money is apportioned. So that $350 million will be apportioned in a new way. Basically, it will give more money proportionally to districts with low property wealth and high student needs than under the previous calculation. So what that means in the district I represent is increased state aid of approximately $12.5 million. Here in Joliet, Joliet Grade School District 86, which is the 4th largest K-8 district in the state, will get an estimated $8.7 million more each year. Valley View School District will get $1.6 million more each year. Joliet Township High School District 204 will get $1.6 million each year. So believe me, we're sensitive to property taxes, the fact that Illinois property taxes are at least the second highest in the country, and this school funding reform is one way to attempt to restrain property tax increases by moving the state towards fulfilling its constitutional obligation to be the primary funder of K through 12 education. There's also a property tax swap mechanism in this bill that requires a separate appropriation, admittedly, but there now is a mechanism in our school funding reform law to, again, help affect the property tax swap where local districts would receive even additional state aid and then have the opportunity to reduce their property taxes.
I'm glad that you brought the property tax freeze. Not freeze, but the whole involvement. But I know there was a lot of talk of freeze. And I'm going to say, being on the county, I think everyone would agree, even though we know our property taxes are outlandish. But speaking, county and its Forest Reserve, I kind of always have thought that it was going on the backs of our budget again, of doing this freeze. And Margot, I know we had talked about this kind of like back, and I know you've been in favor. But I also, with you being on the county and knowing it, we've been very responsible. We've been very balanced, and we're not raising taxes. So I just, to be honest, I was always just kind of curious how that even came in play, because I do again think that both sides were in agreement to that. You're trying to get to that point of doing the freeze.
The way I look at it, in my opinion, in my ideas of how some property tax relief should be delivered to our our homeowners here in the state of Illinois, has to be by relieving local governments of some of the burdens that they face, many of which are imposed on them by the state of Illinois. Some of the pension laws, some of the school mandates, things like that. If we don't change some of those things, how can we expect, and when the idea of some property tax relief was first floated as part of the turnaround agenda, it was always in conjunction with other relief for business and for local government. Because some of the things that, what is the workers' comp cost here in Will County? It's a big number, right? At least it was when I was here, and it hasn't improved any, has it? So, if we reform workers' comp, if we reform our pensions, if we do something with school mandates, all those things help local government and would perhaps put us in a position to offer some sort of property tax relief, mandated by the state. But to do one without the other, to put some property tax relief in the form of a freeze without alleviating any of the drivers that you guys can't do anything about, is not a well-taken position, in my opinion. And it's always been where I've been coming from. And I think I've said that on the floor of the House, and I've certainly said it to all of you. So, this isn't a secret. And I think that was always the intention of looking at it that way, of the property tax relief. You can't do it in a vacuum. We have to do something to, just as we're trying to reduce some of the costs and make it easier for business to expand and grow and move to Illinois, we have to do some things for our local governments as well, whether it be a school or a different kind of government. That's where I'm coming from on that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on that?
Sure, Suzanne, I will. So we read all this stuff all the time in the paper. And the thing is, and it's really hard because at the county board, we have to deal with our employees, we have to deal with employees at all different levels, and we deal with lots of different unions. And what I always say is this, is that I want our employees to have good benefits. I want them to be well paid and have a good work environment. But they also have to understand that this is not sustainable. The current pension system we have set up and the school mandates for another thing, it's not sustainable. We cannot keep going like this because we're going to tax everybody out. We're taxing people out. My district and Lori's, ours is right at Indiana. And how many doors you go to, and there's no one there, and they've moved to Indiana. They can easily move to Indiana and still keep their same jobs where we live. So it has to be done, and nobody wants to do it, nobody likes to do it, but they need to do it. We need to make pension. We cannot let people continue, our employees, as much as they do a great job for us, and we have to make sure that their pension benefits don't supersede our constituents. Our constituents are paying for this. And we have to keep that in mind, and the school mandates that's another thing. We can't, this is all a great idea. I can tell Ray, I need him to go do this and this and this and this for me today. This is what I want because it's gonna help everybody else. But in that same moment, how is he gonna do it? He doesn't have more time to do, and he has no more dollars to do it. So we need to really do that. We need to make those hard decisions on both sides of the aisle. Everybody has to do it. We try and do it here in the county. I make these comments publicly every time we have a discussion on our negotiations with the unions. Health insurance is going to kill us if there's not a change in Obamacare. It's going to kill us. What's the amount we're going to be taxed if there's no change, Mike, for insurance? Per person.
Over $1 million.
What is it per person? He knows that number, right? It came out in our meeting. It's like 26,000 per employee or something like that, tax?
That would be our overall probably individual.
Yeah, so that's a huge amount. How do we afford that? How do we afford that when we have people who are middle or lower middle income people living here in homes? We cannot keep taxing. That's my opinion. I totally agree with Margot and Sue Resin on that. We have to do that. We have to make those changes, as difficult as it is. We have to remember that an employee of a government has benefits that the person in the private sector does not have. They have many, many benefits, and we can't keep putting it on the backs of those people who are in the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate your comments. Regarding mandates, so the school funding bill that we passed relaxes mandates regarding driver's ed and PE. So school districts can now contract out driver's ed, as is done in a number of other states. And regarding PE, local school boards now have the authority to reduce PE from 5 days a week to 3. And also the exemption for student athletes has been broadened. I think it previously existed in just grades 9 through 12, now it includes 7th and 8th grade. And regarding pensions, a large part of the projected $2.9 billion in savings in the budget we adopted is achieved through the creation of a Tier 3 pension system. So it's a hybrid defined benefit, defined contribution plan. And granted, Illinois has horrendous pension liability. People my age who are in Tier 1 are leaving the system. Tier 2 was created a few years ago. It has some problems. We know we need to address our pension liabilities, so that's why this year we created Tier 3.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, and I, again, appreciate the opportunity. I think we're looking at this in a vacuum. There's, X amount of dollars, and we're all fighting over the dollars, clearly. However, the same negotiations and concerns that you have at the county level, we have at the state level. We're a large employer as well. So when we're having discussions about what should we do with the budget, and not only are county governments coming before us, but everybody who relies on the state for payment or provides services for the payment, they are meeting with us as well. So we have those same very difficult decisions to make at the state level as well. Until we start, again, looking at the state and what can we do to increase jobs. If you look at us for the last decade, the state of Illinois has lagged behind all other states in job growth. So the private sector needs to be our partner so we can grow out of where we are. We cannot tax enough, nor do we want to only increase taxes as an answer to get us out of where we are. So if we would have grown at the same rate that the federal government did for the last decade, if our jobs would have grown at that rate, we would have brought in an additional $14 billion, 11 to $14 billion, I don't know the exact amount. And we would have, if our spending didn't change, we would be in the black and not in the red. That's how the private sector helps government and partners with government in order to balance their budgets. That's where we're at. Unfortunately, we still lag behind. That's why the reforms that we talked about were so important that did not get passed. My colleague, Senator McGuire, did talk about a couple of unfunded mandate reliefs, but just so you know, for school district, if you ask the superintendent, how many unfunded mandates do you have? They'll tell you there's over 150. 150 unfunded mandates just for schools. I have no idea for counties, I'm sure it's a lot as well. That's the kind of mandate relief we need, and flexibility at the local level to allow you guys to make those decisions as well. And then lastly, one comment. We passed a budget. If you supported the budget, you're essentially supporting an income tax increase because the budget was spending $5 billion more than revenue we're taking in. That's the reality of it. So if you want to pass a balanced budget, you had to come up with the revenue. So unfortunately, the income tax went up as well. Unfortunately, that's not enough money. I mean, this budget is $1.3 billion out of balance as we speak. And we have more expenses coming down the road. What are we going to do as a state with the Affordable Health Care Act? Big issues such as that. So now we hear the talk about potentially passing the progressive tax, which I think could be the worst thing for this state. It's like a blank checkbook for a state who cannot control their spending. So that's a conversation that I think we're going to hear, and dialogue we'll be hearing in the next year as well. We need more taxes, and we need to pass a progressive tax, something that we don't support in a state that can't control its spending. Thank you.
This has been going on for a long time. Yes?
Yeah, I just got two more comments based on what I said earlier. The first is, Senator McGuire, when you say that the new budget is, helping fund these health initiatives, that sounds good. Sounds very political. The problem is, we have to fund health things too. And by reducing our numbers, by reducing our revenue, you're defunding some of our health programs. That's just a fact of life. And when it comes down to, I agree with Senator Rezin, economic vitality is what's going to get us out of this. We're not doing anything to gain any economic vitality. But what you can't do is you can't hide behind a budget that takes monies away from us, the counties, the villages, and say we're balancing our budget. We got to take it from somewhere. Why did you have a 50% income tax increase or a 75? Let you take the brunt of that instead of trying to pass it on a budget that no one can read, that no one even knew. It took us several weeks just to find out what we're losing, and we're still not sure if that's all that we're going to lose. Make it transparent to us what we've got to deal with, and make it transparent to the public as well, because it wasn't just a 32% tax increase that they're going to get in their income. It's going to be much higher once all of these losses come to fruition at the counties and at the village and at the municipalities. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. There were across-the-board cuts. Every state agency took a 5% cut. Higher education, which had suffered a grievous reduction in state funding over the 2 years without a budget, took a 10% cut. And my friend and colleague, Senator Rezin, properly mentioned jobs. Job growth is a concern of all of us. Locally, the former Illinois Youth Center on McDonough Street, IYC Joliet, of course, we spent $17 million of tax revenue. This began under Governor Quinn on brick and mortar work to repurpose it. And it's reopening as the Joliet Treatment Center. This will be first of its kind facility in the state of Illinois, where at capacity 450 adult male offenders with severe mental illness will be treated. And this returns nearly 300 jobs to Joliet that left Joliet when IYC was closed. And I sincerely believe this is a valuable investment in public safety too. We have 400,000 men and women in Illinois correctional facilities. At least 10% have severe mental illness. So this facility will treat the mental illnesses of 450 adult male offenders. When they go back into general population at facilities from which they're serving their sentences, the fact that their mental illnesses will be properly treated should reduce incidents in prisons. 75% of all fights in prisons involve an offender with a severe mental illness. Also, of those 40,000 people we have behind bars, 95% are going to serve their sentences and come back to our communities. And if they come back still hearing voices, still suffering from bipolar disorders, nobody's safe.
Absolutely correct. Can I ask you really quick, you had mentioned about the higher ed, and we have talked about this before. We had a couple universities that were in threat of not opening or possibly closing doors.
It was in the final days of the regular session, so it was probably about May 29th or May 30th that I spoke with David Glassman, who's the president of Eastern Illinois University, and he said, we need a budget. We need to resume state funding of our 9 public universities, or we won't be able to make payroll in July. I said, okay, wait, I want to make sure I have this in my head. You won't be able to make payment at the end of July. He said, no, at the beginning of July. So it appeared, oh, and then the Higher Learning Commission, which is the accrediting agency for public universities throughout the Midwest, issued a letter, I think it was in the 3rd week of May, warning of, quote, accreditation consequences if we didn't fund higher ed, which meant that Eastern could have lost its accreditation, Western could have lost its accreditation, Northeastern Illinois accreditation, perhaps Southern, perhaps Governor's. And once a public university loses its accreditation, you might as well close the doors.
And that's why I knew Eastern was on the verge of possibly.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you. I know and respect each and every one of you in this room, except the guy there. I don't know Mr. Conner at this time, but I'm sure I will over the future in the coming years. My question, when I sit here, sitting back as a business owner, it's pretty upsetting because I look at Illinois in a much different light. I look at Illinois as having one of the largest inland ports in North America, if not the largest. I look at Illinois as having a highway infrastructure that leads east, west, north, south. I see our access to fresh water, our utilities, our workforce, but yet we have a negative migration. That doesn't happen on accident. To me, this is simply due to one thing, and it's politics under the dome in Springfield. We continue to subsidize, or you continue to subsidize the sins of the past on the backs of the local governments. I think it's important that we realize we all have the same customers. Whether they're voting for you, they're voting for me at the same time. They're voting for Lauren, they're voting for everybody up here. So we may say shift the bucket and lower the tax, or raise the taxes here and then cut, and then we have to subsidize. It just keeps rolling downhill. And the individuals in Illinois are just tired. They're tired of waking up, another bill, less on their paycheck. And I'm not blaming either side, but I would like to hear some just mature conversation from, for once, come out of Springfield, where we're not sitting on separate sides, where we're actually communicating, getting along, and trying to work together. Because at any time, I could call Lori Summers and I could say, hey, Lori, this opioid, issue that we have in Will County, we have to figure something out. I met with the executive's office on numerous occasions about it. Everyone up here has reached across the other aisle at some point to get something done. But I don't see that happen ever in Springfield. And I know we call it a bipartisan, but it really wasn't what the people from Illinois want to see. They would love to actually wake up and see people not worrying about the next election, but worrying about the actual individuals in their district, the way the maps are drawn, the way all this stuff happens. And I understand it happens in a lot of states, and I'm not blaming one side, because in Texas it's drawn the opposite way. I get it. But it would be really nice to hear you try to tell us, what are we going to do to bring in business? What are we going to do to keep them here? Because a negative migration, folks, as our costs increase, we have less people to put the burden on. That's a disaster. When you own a business and you have less customers, but you have increasing costs, you have increasing inventory, you have decreasing cash, there's only one thing on the horizon, and that's disaster. And until the businesses turn it around by increasing their revenue, by lowering their costs, the same holds true for what happens in Springfield. So I would like to hear the four of you talk about, what are we going to do to show businesses across the country and to show the public in Illinois that we have a viable state with viable intentions, and we can cater to these businesses. And why would you want to come to Illinois? I just signed a very nice deal where I'm going to be supplying Asia and Europe my product. And one of my managers came in and says, why do we stay here? You know what? At some point, it gets hard to keep defending the inevitable. And I think if just my little company in this residence district, has to question itself, much larger companies are going to question themselves as well.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm glad that you brought that up, Ray. One of the things that I visited, two businesses in particular that stick out in my head, met with the presidents, CEOs, CFOs. And it is interesting to talk to them about what are the disadvantages and advantages of their location. And one of the central things that both of the two businesses that I have in mind, one was in Romeoville, one was in Woodridge, they both talked about their need to get young people who are educated to come and work in their businesses, because those are the innovators, those are the entrepreneurs, those are the young people. And they've talked about the damage that was done to higher education during the time frame where we didn't have a budget. So we're still digging out, from the damage that was done during those 2 years when we were piling up money and burning it. So it was very interesting to me, because I thought that their first discussion would be taxes and infrastructure in the other areas where we've had problems. But one of the main components that both of them discussed was the need for educated people coming out of universities, ideally in Illinois, because that is where they want to pull from, to go work at their businesses. And you talked about reaching across the aisle. That is something that needs to happen. It's been 3 months since I've been down in the legislature. There's one Republican that invited me out to dinner, very nicely, Dave McSweeney. We had a great dinner together. But there has not been a lot of functions, even down in Springfield during the time frame that I was there, where everyone is there discussing, just talking in a relaxed setting. So there does need to be more of that, and that's, I'm not blaming either side for that. I'm just telling you what I noticed since I went down to Springfield. And one of the things, obviously as a prosecutor, one of the reasons that I voted, for the agreement on Senate Bill 1, the education funding bill, is because it was a compromise. And it was based on evidence. Of course, as a prosecutor, you would like to see people make decisions based on evidence. And in that model, it was an evidence-based model. In other words, let's look at best practices elsewhere. Let's not have a pride of authorship that we have to come up with something unique. What's worked in other states? Obviously, in many discussions, one of the comparisons that has been done between states is looking at Kansas versus Minnesota. Now, again, I'm not an economist. I'm not going to be a proponent of one method or the other. But what I'm saying is, let's look at the states that are working and take the best practices that we can see and follow those practices. Now, unfortunately in Minnesota, they had to increase taxes to get things moving again. And I think, Mike, you made a very good point. Sometimes when the bills got to get paid, you just got to pay the bills. And everyone understands what revenue is in this context. But as Mike said, nobody wants to be the first person up there advocating for a tax increase. And that's very understandable. But let's look at evidence-based models utilized by other states to either dig themselves out of the hole that we find ourselves in now, or come up with basically some new solution for Illinois that's unique to us. And so hopefully smarter people than me, economists, can look at what other states have done and give us very clear suggestions going forward, because no one wants to have the third rail discussions, as Mike pointed out, about, hey, we have to pay our bills and the money's got to come from somewhere. So I'm looking forward to obviously the upcoming veto session and then the session next year to try to work on exactly those issues. And let's look at what works. Instead of talking politics, let's take a look at what's worked.
You brought up a very good point, education. We need educated people in Illinois. I happen to be raising 2 teenagers. One is in freshman year of college, and it's not in Illinois. Because let me tell you, 95% of the children that graduated with her in her college prep high school left the state of Illinois. Now, you can get an old dud like me up here, and I'm going to pay taxes maybe for another 10 or 15 years into the system, and that's great. But these high-income earners that have 40 years of paying into the system are not really attending Illinois state schools. The offers that they get from outside the state are so much greater than what they get even from in-state. Our in-state tuition at Illinois is higher than out-of-state tuition at major universities across the country. Guess what? She's going to go. She's not going to come back. And Illinois just lost out on an international business major individual that will be making money and paying into the system for 40 years. And that's something that has to be looked at.
Chuck, did you have?
Yeah. Hi, Chuck Mayer, Majority Leader here on the County Board. We keep talking about spending and getting more money to spend more dollars on more things and activities. Pat talked about, increasing dollars for our school districts and stuff. Yet we're seeing an exodus of students from our schools. So we're reducing the number of students in schools, yet increasing the dollars. And we're not seeing a correlation between increased dollars and performance. So now these folks are then, my colleagues, we're talking about higher ed here. Our grade schools, our elementary schools, if we're not looking at a better way to do what we do for less money, we have a problem. If we're always looking at what our total expenses are and not looking at the services that are there. You know, you talk about a 5 or 10% increase cut across all the departments. Is that warranted? I don't know. Was the research done to show that this department is the same as this department, and the activities that are done in this department affect this group of number of people for this amount of dollars? I doubt it. Because most of the time, that's not what we as politicians looked at. You know, we went through a huge process in developing our capital plan. We've gone through taking a look at and spending extremely huge amounts of time looking at data, where our expenses are, where our revenue sources are, and depending on you guys making promises and keeping those promises. And then when we see us getting a fee charged to taxes that you collect, are we supposed to now charge fees to all the districts and all the taxing bodies that we collect money from? Can we do that? It doesn't make sense. So if you're talking about data-driven decisions, then take the data down to the point of efficiencies and productivity of the different departments that are out there and what we're doing. I know I'm in District 204, and we're not even close to the top 15% of the number of dollars spent in the state. Yet, we absolutely have some of the best schools in the state of Illinois, time and time again. But we don't have to spend those dollars. It's not about spending the dollars. It's about putting together good services. So I would challenge you guys to take a look not at just your expenses and how you're going to pay your bills, but how you're going to get a handle on how those dollars are being spent, what they're being spent for, and when the hard decision is that some department needs to be cut or reduced extensively because the amount of dollars per person being spent doesn't make sense, then do it.
We could return to jobs. I mean, I grew up in Joliet. You could roll out of bed the day after graduating from high school, get a job at Ruberoid, you were good for 40 years. That era is over, right? I recently heard Mark Densler, who's the director of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, speak, and he had a slide showing Illinois' anemic, well, there was a loss in manufacturing jobs over the last decade, especially contrasted to surrounding states. And so I asked him, what remedies do you suggest? Here's what he said. Stability, certainty, comprehensive tax reform, workers' comp reform. So again, the head of the Illinois Manufacturers Association is advocating comprehensive tax reform. I think, for me, the best local example of how our economy has changed is that when I was growing up, there was a Fisher body plant in Willow Springs. There were 1,900 union members working there, stamping out body parts for GM, right? What is it now? UPS's largest facility in the country. Production to service. Probably delivering goods made in Asia. So again, Densler says stability and certainty, and frankly, that's one reason why this income tax hike is permanent, not temporary. Is because we careened from, right, a Blagojevich era tax rate to a higher Quinn tax rate and then a lower Ronner era tax rate. That plays hop with state retirees trying to decide whether they should keep putting money in the clunker or buy a new car. They don't have certainty. With university leaders who don't have certainty, don't know whether or not they can add faculty or expand programs. With CEOs who don't know whether or not they can buy new equipment. And I would also suggest taking a look, if you haven't, at the Civic Federation's report of last February. So the Civic Federation is Chicago's corporate elite. Civic Federation recommended this, a combination of spending restraint and comprehensive tax reform. So Lawrence Massal, the director, explained this. Limit annual net growth in state agencies, annual net growth in spending to 1.7% across the board. And broaden the sales tax and lower the rate, so tax services like surrounding states do. Iowa taxes 79 services. Broaden the sales tax and lower the rate, raise the personal income tax rate to 5.25%. This is what the Civic Federation recommended. And join 38 other states and tax some non-Social Security retirement income. That's the recommendation of Chicago's business elite.
Do you want to tax Social Security?
No, non-social security retirement.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to kind of segue in, oh, I'm sorry, Margaret, did you? I apologize.
I just wanted to address my colleague Ray Tuminello's comments about jobs. And I think another thing that the retail merchants and the manufacturers both said is that this was the worst session ever for business in Illinois. At the end of the session, that's one of the things they said. So I don't think that we have yet addressed the issues that business would like to see us address. I think that, one thing that's becoming clear to me here today is that things are a little bit different in the Senate than they are in the House. There's not a lot of, in the 3 years that I've been there, I haven't noticed a lot of consideration going to any of the concerns of business. That's not on our agenda. Notwithstanding, many of us on my side of the aisle saying we need to grow, we have to grow our way, we need to encourage more jobs. That's not met with very much, what should we say, enthusiasm on the other side of the aisle. So while I agree that that's really important for us to do, my observation in the 3 years that I've been there is that that is not on the agenda of the leaders, the people who control the agenda of the Illinois House. And I'm not expecting it to be until that changes.
Thank you, Representative. Mike?
Yeah, I just have one more comment, and this one is political. I think, capitalize on what Ray said, people are tired of hearing rhetoric over and over again. And for example, on the school funding bill, everybody knew the TIF exclusion and the city of Chicago real estate issue was the big issue, at least we all knew, but those were the big issues. And to have run commercial after commercial to try to play it down like it doesn't exist, save that for the campaigns. We're gonna see enough of that, I'm sure, in the coming year. When it comes to when you're negotiating, just negotiate. Like Ray said, get it done. And work together instead of trying to stigmatize the other side, that they're the devil, they're the bad guy in this. We don't need to see that. We need you guys to work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll speak to that because I sat on both of the last two education funding commissions. So, and we've talked at length for the last 5 to 6 years about changing our education funding formula, which has been in place for the last 20 years. And both sides do recognize, and I appreciate the last comment, and I understand the frustration, and it's easy to put a politics stamp on a lot of this, but I can tell you, under the umbrella of what happened with the budget, a couple of good things came out of Springfield that no one talked about because of the stalemate in the budget. This education funding formula reform that was passed was no question. It was bipartisan and bicameral. And this consisted of hundreds of hours by the people who sat on the commission, thousands of hours by our staff to put a comprehensive bill into place, which, you know what, we like probably about 60 to 70%, and in the world that we live in, that's not a bad bill, I'll be honest with you. And as my colleagues will say, it does more equitably fund schools according to the school districts that need it the most by putting school districts in 4 tiers. If you have low property wealth and you receive a lot of money from the state, you should be in tier 1. If you have high property wealth, then you should rely on more local resources. So that's a good system. It also puts a mechanism, there's mandate relief in there, puts a mechanism in there for property tax relief that we've talked about. If you are taxing over adequacy, over that target of what it will cost to educate a student, then the local constituents have the ability by referendum to put a freeze on property taxes or lower property taxes by 10%. It's only for the school districts that are overtaxing where they need to be, overtaxing their adequacy targets. It puts into place a commission to study TIFs. As Mike said, that's an issue because when you have a TIF, especially in Chicago, all of downtown Chicago is a TIF district. And the discussion is they artificially lowered their property taxes, which means they were taking more money to educate their students from the state. And that's money away from our school district. So that's a fight worth having, and it was a good fight to have. Also, the pension payments are outside of the budget as we speak, or they're put into the budget, they're outside of the education system. And, you know, there's a few other things in there that make sense. Also, at the federal level, we passed our ESSA plan, which puts accountability back into school districts. Now there's metrics for school districts that they have to comply by. Before, it was more of an arbitrary, you know, show up increase in growth of maybe 1 or 2%. Now the growth that they have to show for school district is substantial. So we have had a good, I would say, last year for education and education funding. In order to get us to where we need to be, where the state bears the burden of funding education and relieves the burden off of property taxpayers, that's what my colleague said that we were trying to do. We, the state, needs to get to 51% of funding education. We're currently at 41%, which means our property taxes have had to backfill or increase to backfill that burden. Now we have the ability every year, you know, there's a commitment to put more money into education. Not a lot, but over 10 years, hopefully get to where we need to be so we, the state, can be fully funding over 51% of education. And then hopefully we'll see that relief in the property taxes that we talked about.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. I'm going to kind of switch this a little up here, and we're going to talk about when you are passing bills in Springfield and how it affects us here at the county. And there was a couple of these township bills that came, and I think, especially with us, and Chuck had just left, but we had in Naperville, where they were consolidating of that of the road districts. And this was a bill a lot of you had passed. Jeff, our engineer, I would like to even, we had discussed this, and Bruce, when he was here, had actually gone to a meeting in Naperville with me when they were doing the big press. And consolidation is the big buzzword right now. And, you know, sometimes again, where we go, where this, how it impacts us on the local, consolidation isn't always the most effective. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. My concern, and that's where I was going to ask our engineer, Jeff, of how this would in fact, could impact. I know when Naperville was talking about with Wheatland, and I have our Wheatland Highway. Bill, are you still here? Bill, and there was a concern. They looked at all of the townships that was in Naperville. They did decide, in fact, Wheatland would not even apply there. It was, they wanted to give Wheatland an award of saying how well that they had ran their highways. But I remember talking with Bruce, and that's where I didn't know, Jeff, if you could comment. I talked to Bruce about what, because they had said, well, if the county could go in and go in partners, and he said, no, this would not be, it would not be very effective, and it would, the cost that would endure onto the county. And I also just think that kind of rolls out on other consolidations that come through, and I just wanted to kind of maybe put this out of when you're making those votes of where and how it is and how it trickles down. If there's any.
I can comment. I can comment on that. I work for a local road district, Will Township, and we had an intergovernmental agreement with Peatone Township and Washington Township, and they do a really good job at working together to keep our roads well maintained to the best of the ability that they can. And I do think if the road districts consolidate with the county, we'd see significant increases because the local townships do it at a lower rate than most don't have IMRF, some do. The three that I mentioned, one runs retirement, the other ones don't have that. So, I mean, there's a huge increase that would come, and that would all be put on the county. So that's something really significant to think about.
And I know we also have Frankfurt, the road district, the road commissioner. Thank you for coming in. So I just didn't know if and again, I apologize, Jeff, as you're sitting there and you were not there involved, but I know that was, we had the townships, and being able to put it on for referendum. So I was just kind of curious of where you were at voting yes on this initiative for this bill.
Is this a bill that we?
Right, they
voted
would
on?
pass, right, that is law. They were both coming, right, so to put on for a referendum of that of the consolidations with townships. Where you go.
Senate Bill 3, maybe I'm confused about this. I think the two bills that passed that became public act consolidate the road districts into the township, not into the town.
It wasn't into the county, it was actually into,
Jeff?
The first House bill, that's for the road districts. And so if they want to consolidate or abolish the district, it's abolishing the district, the township takes over. The township takes over the road district. They can contract with the county, the municipality, or a private contractor. It doesn't necessarily come to the county, but they can contract with the county if the county so chooses. So that's one option for them. The second one, Senate Bill 3, is the township as a whole, all the offices combining together. Now, how they end up faring for their road district, whether they contract out or they contract take the road districts together, that's their decision. But again, that could come to us, not necessarily, but they could approach the county to contract that as well. And as you've indicated, the townships, they do a great job, but they are at a different level than the county in maintaining the roads, and our expenses, our wage scales are different. So for them to be able to pay for our scales, it would be difficult.
so it'd be higher,
Yeah.
a lot higher.
Is there anyone else that has any?
Oh, Jim?
Yeah, Jeff, if a road district is eliminated in its north, indeed the roads then default to the county, correct?
They go to the township, according to.
The roads default to the care of the township board, and because they're the ones that continue with the levy authority. So now they can contract with the county for maintenance.
I do understand that, but if the road district goes away, if the township goes away, who do the roads default to?
Well, take DuPage Township, that township road district is gone. The county does not have those roads.
Well, that's because all those roads were in the village of Bolingbrook. But what
Well,
happens?
they fell under 4 miles, so
Right.
not every one of them was, but they were just under 4 miles. So then those went to, I honestly don't know how the township maintains those anymore. Maybe they are on the
They are,
now,
it's the village of Bolingbrook.
but at the time they weren't.
But I do believe, if I can speak, I do believe that there still is a levy that DuPage Township does. So they contract, they still, still turns into the contractual work for their road work, even though they're under the 4.5 miles to be a road district. So it wouldn't default to the county under these new laws. It would be contractual through the township board. And the township boards would still do the levy. So you're eliminating a road district and a highway commissioner position and full-time or part-time employees is what you're doing. Everything else would be contracted, the way I read it.
Out of the township,
Yes.
under the 4.5 miles.
Under the new laws that
Under
they're
the law, so
trying to
anyone-
get rid of the road districts or consolidation. The levies would never go away. So there is no tax savings because the levies would still be there. It will be just run by the town board and contract. The levies would never go away.
Jeff?
I'm just going to say something in general to certainly the legislators that are here, but I would say this to the whole legislature. Yeah, this constant attack of going after townships by many legislators, to hit the lowest hanging fruit, you would consider the government has the least ability to fight you. The government that taxes absolutely the least of any taxing body on a tax bill. The one who probably provides the most services or gives the best return for the buck. And legislators continually want to go after townships, whether it's a road district, and road districts maintain more roads in the state of Illinois than anyone, by far, by any other jurisdiction. And it's constantly wanting to go after this low-hanging fruit, kind of like, you're the 6-foot guy, and you're going to go fight the 4-foot guy. Why don't you take on some real consolidation? Why go after the fire departments? These fire districts, because you don't have the backbone for it, that's why. Because that has political push. But if you really want to look at consolidation, that's not the ones you should be looking at. You know, they're way up on the tax bill, generally right behind the schools. In my township, I have 3 fire departments. Really? They can't be consolidated? You know, they all buy the same stuff. So this constant, you know, attack by the legislature, not you necessarily, but in general, and these bills generally always coming out, attacking townships is really, I think, a little bit of smoke and mirrors, and has, you know, is going to have the most impact. Like somehow people in unincorporated areas shouldn't have very local representation. That's what you're saying. You know, you don't really deserve representation. You can just go down to the county. You know, I think it's insulting to those people who live in unincorporated state of Illinois. Certainly, I'll say Will County. And so, you know, there's many things I could have commented on today. I decided not to. Sometimes it's like you can't say something nice, don't say nothing. Don't say nothing at all. And since I didn't feel my comments would have been maybe a little bit confrontational, if there's one area I can be confrontational about, it's with townships. And yes, I'm a township supervisor, and have been for many years, and have been in township government since the early 80s. So I feel a little catch, because I see in my township, you could say Frankfort Township is a developed township. Frankfort Township has approximately 60,000 people that live in it, and 18,000 of them live in unincorporated Frankfort Township or Will County. You know, if you want to tell me they should deserve some type of local representation, I beg to differ with you. And by the way, this is universal. This is a nonpartisan issue. It seems to come from all sides. Probably more from my party than the Democratic Party. But I just feel I want to make a comment. I would hope that all of you would fight for Frankfort Township government, not just Frankfort Township, all townships. Well, you can specifically do something for us.
Just because I'm an unincorporated Frankfort Township resident, Jim.
There you go. Yeah, so, you know, and I think Marvin can tell you, and you can go to all townships, you know, they bring real value to not only the entire township, but certainly to those unincorporated folks. And provide services that municipalities just have no interest in providing. Whether it's, you know, running PACE programs or senior programs or, you know, nutrition programs and so forth. You know, partnering with many of the county agencies and private sector agencies that deliver services. I don't see that anywhere else. So keep us in mind, we're the least expensive form of government, the least expensive taxing body on the tax bill. You know, and you know, if you think giving people in my township their $31 back every year that's on the bill, you know, I beg to differ. I don't think it's that township government people should be going after. I would also say consolidation, schools should be consolidated. Those are where the savings are. So, okay, can I get off the soapbox?
No, I agree with you, and I will say, before I got onto the county board, Speaker Eustace, I kind of was in the same thing, going, consolidation, we need to consolidate. We have more layers of government than any state, we need to consolidate. But once I got up to the county, and I realized of how important that this is their government. This is so many people's government in the way that it has, and you're right, we couldn't do the amount of services for the low price of the township and what you have to offer. And our assessor, I think I had saw her earlier, Rhonda, made a great comment about, do you want your assessor to to be in Joliet and not live in Naperville, or live in Frankfort, or live in, so there's a lot of factors. Yes, Tom?
There was an item I wanted to bring up. I mentioned it at our last meeting concerning parking commercial vehicles on township roads. We have a problem some of our county residents that have neighbors that are parking commercial vehicles, and I proposed a parking regulation on township roads that you can only have one commercial vehicle parked on a public street in a township road. And we also have an industrial district where they're parking semis on the township road and obstructing other businesses in the area. So I'd like to bring this to the attention of the legislators and the committee, see if there's something they can do about it. It's not a county road, it's a township road, so the county really can't pass any legislation on this. So we would need assistance from Springfield. I'll give you some more information on it. I appreciate any help that you can give me on that. Thank you.
And if you can talk with Brent and Julie and just kind of tell them where you're at. We haven't talked about this as a committee or any details at the moment. This is just kind of information that has surfaced of an issue that is happening in New Lenox Township, if I'm correct. Is there any other?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
This is a little broader, so I'm going to take this out of the high weeds. But I was sitting here, and as I'm listening, first of all, as I listen to state government, I have a slow burn anyhow, and as some of the subjects that you guys are bringing up, it seems to bring that out more and more. I mean, the collar's getting hotter, and I'm getting more frustrated, and I see it on your faces as well. Margot, I said, you opened up with your frustrations. Representative Connor, I think you made the statement that you were surprised, and thank you for sharing it as somebody new coming into the system, that you can communicate with the public and maybe at a closer level, that you're shocked at the lack of meetings and bipartisan discussion and cross-the-aisle conversations to look towards solutions, legislative solutions. So I'm going to look at it this way. I've heard a couple times that we don't want to, we don't want to blame either side, or we don't want to blame either side. Why? Somebody's to blame, right? So what I want to know, and because you guys can only do so much, we know that, so you don't need a lecture from me. I appreciate you in there trying to fight the fight. But what I want to know is you vote for leadership. On both sides of the aisle, you vote for your leaders. And if you can't get things done at your level, I want to know who you're voting for, why you're voting for them, and what are you going to tell your constituents? Because that sort of decisions are being made. And are you not meeting across the aisle because it's the political discussion has become so polluted by leadership that isn't an environment in which that you guys can operate? And if that is the case, what are you doing to solve it? What are you doing to hold your leadership accountable? Where's your backbone as legislators? Or point to a situation where you've seen that occur, because that's where it's going to happen. Because you can have great ideas and great thoughts and everything else here in the well, but if it doesn't get to leadership and you don't impact leadership, that where the decision of the legislation is documented, then you have very little effect. So what would you tell your constituents?
The one legislative leader I vote for, of course, is the Senate President, since I'm in the majority caucus, and I voted for John Cullerton. And we see the effect of Senate President Cullerton's leadership in cooperation with then Senate Republican leader Christine Rodonio. One of the bills I passed this year expands mental health services throughout the state via television, essentially, Skype, those kinds of technologies. And I'm really proud that the chief co-sponsor of the bill is Senator Dale Ryder from Mattoon, very conservative Republican. And I sponsored the bill because, again, it will increase access to mental health services for place-bound individuals, not just in our area, but statewide. And Senator Ryder supported it because he represents 12 counties in southeastern Illinois where you could probably count the number of mental health professionals on one hand. So I offer that as an example of bipartisan cooperation. The bill passed unanimously. It's a bill that should benefit the people of Illinois.
big issue, not only in Illinois, but nationally. And, you know, Senator McGuire, you mentioned earlier that, you know, juvenile prisons are going to be converted into a mental health facility for folks that are incarcerated. Here again, so now you have a penal system like mental health. And the largest mental health facilities in the country are run by sheriff's departments, LA County, Cook County. And this has to do, and much of this has to do with decisions that were made at the state level. I think probably prior to all you being there. And that was to start to cut or close mental health facilities, state mental health facilities, the way where the treatment should have taken place, and that other facilities, other units of government like sheriff's departments and so forth could use as part of their overall treatment. They had someone who had some severe mental health issues. We could send them over to Tinley Park, and that was the whole region. So now you close, and it has to do with budget. So closing helps your budget. Here again, it's this cost shifting to somewhere else. So Senator Vega mentioned the various nonprofits that do some mental health treatment, and seem to be proud of the fact that you were increasing some of the resources for those folks. What I would suggest is, why doesn't the state of Illinois take on its responsibility and start reopening or developing a mental health network that the state once had? You know, to me, this is something that is crucial, especially for our jails, our sheriff's departments. This cost is becoming considerable, and it's not very efficient. Just this. So, because that's not the business of a sheriff's department, even though they're starting to develop, especially the large counties, they find themselves having this redeveloped mental health within their departments, triaging those folks over there, getting them on their medications. This is really part of the mental health crisis in Illinois is due to what the state actions were in mental health. So you can tell them, look what we're doing. Look what you did, is what I would say. And you really need to start having that discussion of how you're going to start to bring back and open the state mental health institutions, facilities. I guess institutions isn't a really good word anymore, right? Facilities to start taking care of the mental health needs of people in the state. And I might also add, you know, when you talk about, well, you know, our budget gets cut, it cuts our health department. And over the last couple of years, the state has cut those grants to our health department, where we now have to start cutting certain those programs because they're grant funded. And many of those programs deal with mental health. So, yeah, I would give you an absolute D- on mental health. I might also add, initially, when the state closed the state facilities, they said, well, the county health departments will do this, and we're going to give you money to do it. It didn't last long. So let's be serious about mental health in this state, and that the state has failed people in the state of Illinois in these areas, and because of the cuts. And you talk about priorities, you wonder sometimes how certain things we cut and certain things continue, programs continue. But I guess that's just a general statement of saying, you know, we really need to take care of mental health. And the state can't just keep pushing it down, because we don't have the resources either. So then we get out of it, so the county gets out of those services, and it gets pushed down somewhere else. Eventually, I think you just have people who are not treated wind up in jail or wind up homeless on the street. Anyway, I'll leave it up there so
No,
far.
thank you, Jen. We're just gonna kind of wrap up with what, I know, John, you had,
On this subject, I believe the CDB has a RFP or an RFI on the street for $100 million facility, mental health facility for either Stateville or the youth center or Tinley Park, right? Is that right? Right now?
Man. So the reason the state is attempting to do a better job treating offenders with severe mental illness is because of a lawsuit filed by an offender named Rasho, who's incarcerated at Pontiac. It was filed in 2007. So this started under the Quinn administration, is continued under our present governor. So the state wanted to avoid a consent decree because consent decrees are terribly expensive and allow little flexibility for the state. So the state offered remedies to the federal judge, and the judge approved the remedies that the state offered. So one of them is step down. So tier 1 treatment will be an inpatient mental health hospital for men and women incarcerated by DOC. The second tier is what are called residential treatment units. There are going to be at least 4 across the state. The one in Joliet is the most staff intensive. And then the third tier of the step down is back to general population, continuing on treatment. So you're right. The DOC is trying to satisfy that first tier requirement by having offenders in 44 beds right now, today, at Elgin Mental Health Hospital, but we need more than 44 beds to treat this population. So yes, Capital Development Board is begun the planning process to build a 200-bed, $150 million inpatient psychiatric hospital for offenders, and the sheet from CDB says it will be located near Joliet, Illinois. So that could be adjacent to IYC in Joliet, it could be in Crest Hill at Stateville, or it could be at the former Tinley Park Mental Health Center. And the Joliet Treatment Center on McDonough Street, there's an open house this Thursday, 3 to 6 o'clock. Introductions are at 3:15. DOC Director John Baldwin will be there. If you would like to suggest to DOC Director John Baldwin an apt site for this mental health hospital, there'll be your opportunity.
Don't you think it's just the wrong way of doing it? Shouldn't we be treating people before they get, if we treated them before, they wouldn't be in those prisons. So our mental health facilities are now going to be run through prisons, and only those who are incarcerated get mental health care? I mean, I realize it's a court order, but I'm just saying that it was an agreement with the courts. I'm just saying that it seems kind of backwards.
Representative?
I have the privilege of serving on the Mental Health Committee, and one of the things that we've been doing in the last year since this committee was formed, this is the new committee this year in the House, this session in the House, is having a bunch of hearings about the fact that the state has completely, you know, the movement nationally is to get rid of institutions. That's not acceptable. People need to be treated in the community. That's the way that we've deemed it to be appropriate in this day and age. And the state closed the institutions, but didn't do anything about providing community-based resources for folks that have mental health issues. So there have been a number of hearings about the types of resources and the populations that need to be served. So we're working on it. That's not a very good answer, but at least the first 2 years I was there, it wasn't discussed at all. So I think it's a good thing that there's a committee actually having hearings around the state looking at what we need to do better. So.
Thank you. We're going to have to wrap it up here. We have another committee that I see in pacing. I do want to end this on a positive note. This has been very dragging, very hard. We appreciate everything you're doing down in Springfield. You know, none of these decisions are easy. Anyone who knows me knows that my as Debbie called it, my bleeding heart, for animals. Waymark, I just want to go on a very positive, because I know you all voted yes. As of now, you know, Illinois is the first state, Mark, we have our Humane Society lobby sitting in the back there. What is it, no elephants, our mascot, my bad, at all going to be confined? I mean, what's the?
Yeah, I'm looking around the room here, I'm seeing all these elephants on the table, it's really making me happy to see them. I'm Mark Ayers, I'm the state director for the Humane Society of the United States, and yes, it's a big deal for us and for other folks who voted for it. No more elephants and circuses and traveling shows. This was a bill that was brought forward by Senator Holmes and by Representative Fine and passed unanimously in the Senate, almost 91 to 14 in the House, just huge margins, we're happy with it. But I'm just ecstatic, I'm still pinching myself over this law Governor signed it a couple weeks ago. It's a big victory for us, a victory for the elephants, and hopefully those abuses will stop. So thank you very much for voting.
I promise you, that is a smile, and we did.
And also shelter pets are the official state
Oh,
pet
yes.
of Illinois too, so that happened.
So, and I know everyone, you know, I saw the comments like, oh, they have to worry about the budget, they have to, no, there's other business that needs to get done. Okay, there's no executive session. Donkeys, I don't think donkeys were at all in the equation. Sorry, next one. Public comment, any public comment? Okay, I just need a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. It was having fun.